This is Jim Williams with your Hurricane City tropical update for September 26th, 11 a.m. Here's the front page of Hurricane City, and we only have one system left on the map out here, and that is Tropical Storm Philippe out in the East Atlantic, and the system should be moving north and is not forecast to become a hurricane. The system should remain weak. I'll show you the animation on the HurTrack program in just a minute. Current feature remains St. John's, Newfoundland, as Tropical Storm Maria, or Extratropical Storm Maria, affected the area on the 16th and came up just clipping the area as it went off to the northeast, and they had very minimal winds in St. John's. So that's the last area that was affected directly by a named storm in the Atlantic, and again, that was Maria on the 16th. So things are pretty quiet out there right now. Let's take a look at what's happening on the HurTrack program with Philippe. And here's the animation showing the system moving north and weakening as there's a trough of low pressure out in the East Atlantic that should shear the system a little bit and turn it off to the north. And that would be at the end of the month here going into October 1st that the system would be weakening and heading off to the northeast. So this is not going to be a factor for anybody. Now let's go ahead and take a look at what happened with Tropical Storm Ophelia. Now, this system has weakened to a remnant low just east of the northern Leeward Islands, but I wanted to go back in history and look at the history of all the systems that were in this exact location right around this time of the year between September 25th and September 27th. That's a day before and a day after this date, to kind of get an idea, to really narrow down what storms were in this exact position. The only one I could find was back in 1898, and this was a very powerful hurricane that made landfall near Brunswick, Georgia on October 2nd, and had winds Category 3 strength as it moved in there. It was a Category 4 right offshore, and then it moved inland and weakened a little bit, but it was a major hurricane making landfall. And I want to get into what areas are vulnerable at this time of the year and going into the rest of the hurricane season to give people an idea of what to expect the rest of the way. I'll get to those images in just a minute. Here is the current wind shear analysis out here. This is the GFS 48-hour forecast. This isn't the current shear situation, but it's pretty similar to what it is right now. And you can see we have really strong wind shear in the entire Gulf of Mexico out here, all through the Bahamas and out towards south of Bermuda. And the remnants of Ophelia is going to come up like this and just continue to be pounded by wind shear. There's been very strong southwesterly wind shear not associated with Ophelia, but destroying the system as it's been moving off to the west-northwest. And that shear should continue, and there's very a minimal opportunity for this to re-strengthen, but there is a window right here south of Bermuda that the system could regenerate a little bit as it moves in tandem with the wind shear. As it begins to hook off to the northeast, it might strengthen a little bit as it passes maybe just east of Bermuda, right near Bermuda. So we'll keep an eye out for that. But things are very quiet in the Atlantic right now, with the exception of Philippe out here, which is also dealing with wind shear and should turn to the north and weaken over the coming days. Let's do a little bit of an inventory here. Here's our current map of the Atlantic Basin, and you can see Philippe out here in the East Atlantic. What's happened this year? Well, we've had a bunch of tropical storms make landfall, but only one hurricane, and that was Hurricane Irene. It moved up the eastern seaboard, although I personally think that this probably was never a hurricane when it moved up the eastern seaboard. There were no reports of sustained hurricane force winds anywhere up and down the eastern seaboard. There were a couple of gusts over hurricane strength, but the system was lopsided and very weak as it moved up the eastern seaboard, and I doubt that there were any hurricane force sustained winds on the eastern seaboard. So you got to doubt whether this was ever a hurricane at all on the eastern seaboard. Now, it was definitely a hurricane down in the Bahamas. They definitely got the worst of the situation. Cat Island, Eleuthera, Great Exuma Island all took very hard hits from Hurricane Irene. It was a Category 3 when it moved through there. In fact, Cat Island also took a hard hit. Long Island, Bahamas, about 4 or 5 islands there that really got walloped pretty good by this system, where people lost roofs and had a lot of structural damage. They're still recovering down in the Bahamas. So that's by far the hardest hit area this hurricane season. And of course, Puerto Rico was affected by Irene as it became a hurricane right over the island and moved off to the west-northwest. They had a lot of flooding down there. And the islands down here have been affected quite a bit by tropical storms that are gaining strength as they move through there. Bermuda's been brushed a few times up in here. We had Lee up here in the central Louisiana, and we had a system early in the year, Arthur out here, and a few other systems that were affecting down right near Veracruz, Mexico, and in that area down there. But basically, overall, if this is all we end up with this hurricane season, it's a lot of people are going to have been lucky this hurricane season, with the exception of the Bahamas. But out of all the hurricanes, the cities in the Hurricane City database, 153 cities, 46 have been affected so far this year. 20 of them were by Hurricane Irene. So if it was not for Irene, we would really be low on the list as far as landfall effects this hurricane season. But overall, about 1/3 of the cities in the Hurricane City database have been affected by a named storm this year. But we have a long way to go. And you have to ask, what areas are vulnerable this time of the year? Well, there have still been some systems that have hit the eastern seaboard and Texas and areas like this in early October. But once you get about a week or two away from the current date we're in right now, which is September 26th, you get out around October 5th. It's very difficult for these areas, especially the northeastern United States. When you get up around north of the Outer Banks, up in the northeast, and you get over here near Texas, all the way into central Louisiana, these are areas that very rarely get hit after the second week of October. So you can pretty much write those areas off. The high affected areas are right in here, and the Southwest Caribbean seems to get affected a lot late in the hurricane season, and there's also a possibility for the Greater Antilles to be affected during the later months of hurricane season. What happens is you have a lot of systems developing in the Western Caribbean Sea, and they move in a variety of directions down here, so that's what we have to watch for. Every once in a while you'll get one like Opal that show up in the Gulf of Mexico and move off to the northeast. And then, of course, you had Lenny back in 1999 that moved like this and affected the northeast Caribbean Sea. So these are the areas we start looking for as we get later into the hurricane season. We'll dissect that down a little bit more as we get into October. And here is Irene. This is the big story so far this hurricane season. Here it went, affected the Bahamas, moved up the East Coast. Again, nobody reported any sustained hurricane force winds, and there's some debate as to whether this is going to be classified as a hurricane for Long Island, even though it was officially downgraded as it moved into northern New Jersey. The northern hurricane force wind field was expanded into Long Island, so this will be interesting to see at the end of the hurricane season when they do a final report on this as to whether this is officially a hurricane for Long Island. But it probably will be, only because it was a hurricane just south of Long Island, but most of the winds were sustained tropical storm force winds, no hurricane force winds anywhere along this coast here that were sustained. So I know there was damage, a lot of rainfall, but that can also be done by tropical storm force winds. So we have a lot of debate to go on that one. Now here are the pressures right now in the Atlantic, actually globally. And right here, let me circle the Atlantic Basin. And notice the purple colors. I've been showing this map several times this hurricane season. And that is because the purple areas show really low pressures. And when you have a low pressure environment, you tend to have large systems. Not necessarily powerful systems, but you have really large spread out systems. And that's why a lot of systems have struggled this year. In fact, the highest strength hurricane this year has been 135 miles an hour. I can't remember the last time that's happened, but when you have low pressure environments like this, you have systems that take a long time to get their act together because they're so large. It takes them a long time to get wrapped up out in here. And that's what we've seen with just about every system. Now notice the pressures are lower out in the East Atlantic right now, and that would be indicative of Philippe out here. That's a smaller system, and it can tend to get sheared a little bit more when they're smaller systems and weaken much faster. Small systems can get strengthened really fast, and they can weaken really fast. Larger systems take a long time to develop, and they take a longer time to come apart, which we saw with Ophelia. Even though it was being sheared by 20 to 30 knots a shear for the last week or so, the system's maintained itself, and it's finally given into the wind shear. But larger systems don't weaken that quickly, and that's what we've seen this entire hurricane season. But now notice the lower pressures have expanded over here into the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean Sea, and east of Florida and up the eastern seaboard, and that would indicate that we'll see larger systems continuing into October, so we'll be keeping an eye out for that. Now here is the water vapor loop from LSU showing the dry air out in the Atlantic Basin. And let's go ahead and take a look at this closer. What we have is system that is weakened due to this upper level low, which is Ophelia. And you can see this big old upper level low here spiraling around, and that's just causing really strong wind shear out of the west and west-southwest. Now, Ophelia might be trying to regenerate a new center out here, but even as it turns to the north, it's going to be sheared like crazy because of this upper level low. And then we have another trough here moving off the eastern seaboard. That's going to move out into the Atlantic and take everything off to the north here. So maybe Bermuda might have to watch this, but it's going to be a very weak system. But look at Philippe out here. Even that's dealing with dry air moving into the system. And here's Philippe over here. And that's going to turn north. It's going to be dealing with wind shear to an upper level low up in here, and dry air to its west being pulled into the system. Philippe might not have too many days left to survive before it gets torn apart by wind shear and dry air out here in the East Atlantic. But overall, unfavorable conditions in the Atlantic right now. Anyway, that's about it for now. Just want to touch base on the predictions I made on June 1st. The highlighted yellow areas are all the areas that have been hit that I said would be hit this year. Grand Bahama Island, Hurricane Irene, Great Exuma, the hardest hit area so far. Hurricane Irene, I predicted that on June 1st. So again, one of my top 5 areas gets pounded by a significant hurricane, and that happened with Hurricane Irene this year. Now, if South Florida areas get hit by a named storm this year, this will probably be the first year in a long time that I've actually picked every single city that ended up being hit during the hurricane season. So we'll see what happens the remainder of the hurricane season. Long way to go yet, all of month of October. Very busy, especially for the state of Florida. We'll see what happens. That's it for now. We'll be back with another update in several days. Thank you again for visiting Hurricane City.